The Soul Society lies in ruins in the wake of the Quincy's first invasion. Thousands of Shinigami are either dead or seriously injured, including numerous high-ranking officials. And in a moment of desperation, the new Captain Commander Kyoraku Shunsui proposes a dramatic plan of his own to the Central 46 in an attempt to better prepare the Soul Society for the inevitable second assault. Kyoraku's plan is a simple one. He wishes to teach the current captain of the 11th Division, Kenpachi Zaraki, who himself is currently clinging to life, the art of the sword. And in doing so, Kyoraku invokes the training of the Soul Society's first ever captain of the 11th Division, the first person to ever hold that title of Kenpachi, Yachiru Unohana. And so this all loops back around to the topic of today's video, the next Bleach battle analysis on the channel, where we're going to be looking at the fated duel between the two Kenpachis in the 1000-year Blood War arc, Zaraki versus Unohana. Before we get started with the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now, as you're in the perfect place for Bleach content like this every single week. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up as well, as it really does help me and the channel by getting it more exposure on the whole YouTube algorithm, meaning more Bleach fans like yourselves get a chance to see it. And of course, if you want to take that support from me another step further, we do also have a Patreon for the channel as well, where you can get videos like this one early and you can support me there for as little as $1 a month. Everyone whose name's appearing on screen right now is doing just that, so I wanted to give them a huge shout out as we do on every video. Thank you guys so much for helping me do what I love. So, Kenpachi Zaraki versus Yachiru Unohana, a thrilling if somewhat unexpected fight in the 1000-year Blood War arc. Not that long ago, I put out a poll asking which fight you guys would like to see as the next one analysed as part of this series, and this fight won out by quite some margin. However, there is one thing I'd just like to quickly address. Despite this fight dominating that poll, essentially, the vast majority of people who took the time to comment expressed their wish to see Kenpachi versus Gremmy analysed. And I agree, I'd love to do that one as well, as I feel like there is definitely less discourse on the internet about that fight as a whole. So basically, to kind of do everything I can, this video, because it did win the poll, will be on Zaraki versus Unohana, but the next Bleach battle analysis video will be Kenpachi versus Gremmy, and I'm looking forward to that. But the Zaraki versus Unohana fight is a wonderful one in and of itself as well. In fact, it's potentially my favourite Kenpachi Zaraki fight in the entire series, and a real gem of the 1000-year Blood War arc that kind of came out of nowhere, but I think the majority of people do really enjoy it. Now, this particular fight takes place over the course of about 4 chapters, ranging from 523 to 527, and thankfully is essentially completely unbroken, which is what we like here on the channel. I much prefer it when a fight is allowed to start and finish with basically nothing getting in the way. And before we dive into actually talking about the fight itself, I do have a slightly funny story relating to the chapter this fight begins on. So this fight starts on chapter 523, which I believe is Swords of Origin, and if that chapter number has no relevance to you whatsoever, that's absolutely fair enough, but 523 is exactly 100 chapters after the last time we ever saw Aizen Sosuke. That was when he was getting sentenced to Muken. And so, you know, the thought just kind of occurred to me when I fired up the chapter for the very first time. I was like, is there any chance we're going to see Aizen on his 100th chapter anniversary of being gone from the series? Almost certainly not. And I'm flicking through the chapter, you know, it's pretty good, and all of a sudden, I'm slapped with a page that says Central Underground Prison Muken, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh, we're actually going to see Aizen. I didn't know the context, I didn't understand how it would work, but for it to be 100 chapters after his last appearance, to suddenly be given Muken out of nowhere, I could not believe it. But of course, it wasn't anything to do with Aizen at all. I can't help but feel like Kubo Did he know that? I feel like maybe he did know that. Regardless, that was quite funny back in the day. But basically what's going on is the fight between these two monsters, Zaraki and Unohana, is taking place in the deepest layer of the prison of Soul Society, Muken, where basically they'll be allowed to kind of just go crazy here and have the battle they've always dreamed of. It's kind of interesting when you think about how resistant the Central 46 were initially to the idea of Kenpachi even receiving this training, that Kyoraku not only got permission for it, but then even went a step further and got permission for them to use the lowest level of the prison itself as their battleground, which I think is a bit of a power move, especially considering it was apparently Unohana herself who recommended they have that arena. And knowing what the Central 46 are like, I imagine they still maybe look down their noses at Unohana a bit based on her criminal background, despite the fact that she has given the Soul Society centuries, maybe even millennia's worth of good service up until now. You can kind of imagine that if she said that, they'd be like, I don't think so, but you know, Kyoraku has somehow managed to make this work for them. And what I really like about this fight is it gives so much introspection into Kenpachi Zaraki. You know, I've said before on the channel that while I enjoy Kenpachi's character, I do think a lot of his fights just kind of boil down to dumb fun. There's a lot of just crazy swinging and big spectacle. This fight is the total inverse of that. It's very small. It's small scale. It's just between two combatants, basically just using swords the entire time. No real flashy abilities, flashy moves, anything like that. And it allows for Kenpachi himself to just really grow and develop as a character, and we find out so much about him as well. And that's why I love this fight. And I love how it opens with a bit of Kenpachi almost setting the stakes for himself a little bit, where he says, you know, if I win here, I'm a captain. If I lose, I'll be nothing more than a criminal. And you kind of wonder if that's the kind of juxtaposition he deals with every single day. You know, the Seirei, there is a real class system in the Soul Society, and the Seirei is absolutely not used to having people like Zaraki in such positions of power, as we find out, you know, people like Byakuya, people like Tozen, always been looking down on him. And now to get this kind of boiled down, immortalized by Zaraki himself to kind of say, if I lose here, I'm just a petty criminal. I really like that. It sets the stage so nicely for what's to come. One thing that only really hit me on my return to this fight for this video is that it's just so crazy to think that when Unohana turns to face Kenpachi and she has her long flowing hair, her scar is showing on her chest, she has that almost glazed over sadistic look on her face, you are looking at an original member of the Gotei 13, and that's awesome. But not only that, you are looking at her in her purest form, in the form she took back then. Whenever we've seen Yamamoto in the present day, he's never really been that person. You know, Yamamoto looked different in that age, he felt different. Whereas this Unohana is exactly the person she was back then, and that's so cool. It's our clearest, most crystal look at a member of the original Gotei 13, and I think that's so cool to get. And immediately, this moment where they both talk about their scars, how they reflected upon each other, and they suddenly move to strike each other, it immediately shows one of this fight's greatest strengths in my eyes, which is its real sense of kinetic movement, its real sense of speed. The choreography throughout is just so good, and that's another reason why I think it's a really strong fight. And if I'm honest, this is a fight that absolutely has to be done well in the anime to really just get across what I think Kubo was going for here, which is just an absolute flurry of blades. And I think it has a lot of potential to be done really well, but also there's a chance they might not nail it, so I'm really hoping they do. And it's interesting that now it feels like we do have such lofty expectations for this fight, because as I mentioned, it kind of came out of nowhere. Now, prior to this battle, prior to the 1000-Year Blood War arc, Kubo had promised that we would see Unohana in a fight, we'd see her with her hair down for the first time ever properly. And that was something that fans were very excited for, but nobody, and I tell you, nobody back in the day thought it was going to take this kind of form, thought it would be a battle between allies to help Kenpachi along his developmental arc. And so this fight had no real expectations because it did kind of come out of nowhere. People were excited for it, but it was a really kind of alien thing. Now, though, I think the fight has cemented itself as probably one of the most popular in the arc, and so I think there's a lot of expectation for it moving into the anime. There's a wonderful moment at the very beginning of the fight where you see how this battle is affecting these people were close to, which gives it that emotional stake that it might not have had otherwise. You know, this is a battle between two bloodthirsty demons, but up until this moment, they had mostly shelved those instincts for a somewhat normal life in the Soul Society. They had built up relationships. We see Isane clutching a letter by the window in the 4th Division infirmary, then she starts crying. Obviously, Unohana has written to her. I'd love to know what that letter says. I mean, I think you can probably infer that Unohana is basically saying, I'm probably not coming back from this, because she went into this with a mission in mind. Whereas Yachiru discovers Kenpachi's eye patch left behind in their barracks, and she obviously knows from that something is up. And I love that as they are contemplating these thoughts, as this moment is playing out, it's interrupted by the occasional sword swing. And I just feel like, again, in the anime, these two are going to be having this little moment. Isane is going to start crying, and you'll hear the sword swing in the background, because the fates of these characters is hanging in the balance in this fight. And I think that's really cool. Now, I don't think it can be understated exactly how powerful Unohana is. And it's a real shame that this is the only time we get to see her fight anything. And that's a disappointment, but you have to realise that she completely annihilates Zaraki, and he doesn't have an eye patch on at this point. To the point where, you know, the fight begins and he brings his blade down upon her, but she basically just sidesteps it, swats him away like a fly, and then proceeds to slice his neck. Her movements are fluid, they're flowing, she's barely even seen when she strikes, whereas the majority of Kenpachi's attacks take up enormous swaths of a page as he comes crashing and blundering into the scene. There's a real difference between how the two of them are approaching this battle, and Kenpachi already has an enormous grin on his face, but you can tell Unohana is like, this is so disappointing. Like, her face, she's just not into this at all as she swats his blade away. She was clearly expecting a lot more from him. But as I said, this is probably my favourite Zaraki fight because he's so self-serious throughout, which is a huge difference to how he quite often is, at least in the fights leading up to this one. In this one, Kenpachi himself has a lot of introspection. He spends a lot of time fighting, thinking, and analysing, and I really like that. And we even get a nice monologue from him a little later on as well. Now, this is going to sound ridiculous in a series that's all about sword fighting, but to see a fight that is basically just pure sword fighting is so wonderful to witness. It gives Kubo a real chance to flex his choreography muscles. People aren't just flinging energy blasts at each other from across an arena. They are getting up close and personal and visceral, and the fight looks and feels great. There's a moment where Kenpachi tries to strike Unohana, but she's already beside him, her foot on his wrist as she tries to bring her blade down onto him. Kenpachi reacts fast enough. He kind of like twists on the floor and kicks her in the side, sending her flying into a wall, which she like bounces off of, and they lock blades in the center. Again, it's going to be so good to see this moving in motion. But for now, what I really have to respect is Kubo's art. This fight is so clean, it's so easy to discern exactly what's going on. It could have been a huge mess of speed lines and everything, but it's so easy to tell what's going on, and that makes it such a joy to see. As the two of them are locked blades, Unohana basically compliments him for being smart enough to approach their fight without his eye patch on from the very beginning. So Kenpachi, it's not necessarily a sign of Unohana's strength, although indirectly it is, but it's more that he's been desperate for this fight for so long. You can imagine somebody kind of came and found him and said that your presence is required down in Muken, come with us to fate, you know, Captain Unohana has requested you. Maybe it was even Kyoraku who came and did it. That's a meeting that would have been cool to see, but you can imagine Zaraki's elation upon learning that he would finally get that fight again. So he was like, I'm not taking this. We're going full throttle from the get-go. But Unohana's still so disappointed, and she says, yeah, while I commend you for doing it, the fact that you have done it means your limit is clear from the start. And she breaks away from their hold, only to sort of leap back at him, slash him, and then dive something into his shoulder. And that panel of her attacking his shoulder is one of my absolute favourites in this fight, just because I think she looks so wicked in it. She looks so sinister. Her eye is kind of like just about visible behind the slash, but I think it's such a good panel, and again conveys such a great sense of movement. But by the time they break apart once more, Kenpachi now has a massive blade sticking out of his shoulder, and Unohana is wielding not only her sword, but also another knife as well. And this is a great moment where they get a chance to stop fighting for a sec and just have a little chat, and it's really good to get Unohana's perspective on battle. As she says to Kenpachi, she basically says, "You're swinging your sword with one hand while doing absolutely nothing with the other one, and yet you tell me that you enjoy the thrill of battle." And I really like that, because she is clearly looking down on the kind of the way he's decided to take his fighting style. And it's really cool, because while on the surface these two characters might seem incredibly similar, they both just love to fight, they actually have very different perspectives on what it means to enjoy a battle. Clearly with Unohana, there are no limits. You are supposed to use everything you have at your disposal, even if that means fighting scrappily, to come out on top and to win. And so here she has taken advantage of Kenpachi's openings to stab him in the shoulder with a second blade as well. And to her, that is enjoying the thrill of battle, to use everything at your disposal to get every hit in you can, even if it means really putting yourself in harm's way. Zaraki, on the other hand, is much more straightforward. A sword fight, a battle, involves the sword in his hand and nothing more than that. He shouldn't have to rely on anything else. And he also, as we know from the past, used to put himself at a detriment even further by wearing the eye patch, by wearing the bells. Everything about Kenpachi is about making the fight harder for himself, whereas everything with Unohana is not about making the fight harder for herself, but just going at it with everything she's got. And we'll get more into that later on, as well, as we kind of see even more of these philosophies bloom in this fight. But for now, that's the crucial difference between them. It's really interesting to see it play out. In my opinion, Unohana's fighting style is born from an era where she was a lot more devious, and would take on so many opponents at once. She was the master of all these different styles, a ruthless criminal, and so she's kind of grown accustomed to just killing people how she sees fit in as many ways as she possibly can. And I think that's really cool. Whereas Kenpachi's has kind of been honed throughout the years to have this almost kind of like honourable sense to it, which again I think is kind of neat. Kenpachi won't kill someone, for instance, who is on the ground at death's door. He tends to just leave them because he doesn't feel necessary to finish off weaklings, as he would say. But there is a definite honour code with Zaraki, which it almost feels like Unohana is looking down on, spitting on even, as Kenpachi literally says to her in this fight that, I would never resort to such cheap tricks to land a hit. You've clearly changed. You are not the woman I once respected. But Unohana says, what do you think you're doing respecting me in the middle of battle? That, it's pathetic. And I think that's really, that's so fascinating. Kenpachi, even though they both love battle, Kenpachi is a product of the more modern day Soul Society, and you have to imagine Unohana has been watching him with disgust for so many years, being like, what are you doing? This is not how you should be fighting. And it's really cool to see them at odds with each other here. What's crucial to understand here as well is that, like many Bleach fights, this isn't just about the flashy moves on paper. It's a battle about ideology as well. It's a battle for the title of Kenpachi, quite literally. Right now, Zaraki is not a Kenpachi. Unohana is the Kenpachi here. She is the strongest that he must take down if he wants to really inherit that title. Right now, he is naked, stripped of his titles in front of her, just another criminal. And I think that's really cool. But Unohana drops a small hint as to kind of Kenpachi's true strength when she mentions that, I haven't changed at all. I'm the exact same person I was when I fought you back then. The difference is that when you were fighting me then, you gave me no openings. I had no chance to use tactics like these extra blades and stuff like that, to which Kenpachi thinks that she's calling him weak. And I also love that during Kenpachi's monologue coming up, Unohana is just completely nonplussed by the entire thing, and she seems to not really care at all about anything he's saying. But seeing Zaraki open up to Unohana here in the midst of their fight again is so refreshing to me. A character who is so often, like I said, just about slashing people, getting some real development here and revealing a lot about his psyche, where he says, that he's respected her for so long. She was his idol. And until they met, he was just wandering in the dark, slicing at nothing effectively because he was so much stronger than everyone else, than everything else. And so now, and when he met her, it was like a beacon. He wanted to be her because she was so powerful, and it totally opened his eyes to what true battle could actually be. And it's interesting because I think Unohana is probably witnessing this with a couple of different thoughts running through her head. It looks like she doesn't care. And I think some of that is she's probably thinking to herself, you shouldn't be doing this in the middle of a fight. You are just standing there spilling your heart out to me on the battlefield. And she's like, that is not how you fight. But at the same time, she's also thinking, this Kenpachi, the way he sees me, the way he saw me is not entirely accurate, which obviously we'll get into. But Unohana, she knows she's there to complete a mission, so she just stabs Kenpachi in the throat. And then, of course, we get that cool moment where he sort of like reawakens and doesn't really realise what's happened at all. And it was supposed to be a slight bait and switch for the reader, but Kubo does a nice little detail where when she stabs him in the throat, Unohana's face gets splashed by a speck of blood, and it's still there afterwards, which is really nice. And it's funny that Kubo would do the speck of blood thing here and then also do it again with Ikkaku during the Bambietta fight, not to illustrate the same thing, but to use a speck of blood to illustrate that something wasn't quite as it seemed. Now, I never expected to see young Zaraki. That was a real treat. That was such a surprise, and it was so cool as well, because Zaraki's just one of these characters that, we have seen him in the past, and I kind of thought that's as far as we would ever go. But to get this, it feels so alien. It feels like a real time in history that we have never explored. This era where even Kenpachi Zaraki himself is just a little boy. And it's so fascinating because it reshapes the way you see these characters. And in my eyes, what's cool about this flashback as well is that this, again, must be one of the oldest flashbacks we have ever seen in Bleach. And it actually begs the question to me as to how old Kenpachi Zaraki actually is. Because I always kind of had him pinned as being one of the slightly, maybe middle-aged to younger generation of captains. However, now of course there is some wiggle room here, but Unohana was captain 1,000 years ago of the 11th Division. But we don't know when she stopped being captain of the 11th Division. That's what's crucial. This could be 400 years from that point, meaning Kenpachi would only be about 600 years old. Or it could be way back 1,000 years ago, which would make him incredibly old. Regardless, it's still really nice to see this, and although we don't know its exact pinpoint location on the timeline, it's still pretty old. But a small detail I really like about this flashback is it kind of gives you a small hint at how these first captains really acted with total impunity. Like the soldier who's out with Unohana kind of alludes to the fact that she has done this before, basically proposed a mission to go out into the Rukongai and subjugate enemies of the Seirete, but really she's just doing it to satiate her desire for battle, to find an opponent who might actually be worthy of her. And it's a total night and day difference. Although Rukongai these days is still not the best place to be, and we have seen Soul Society even in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc killing people in Rukongai for the greater good, it's crazy to think about a single captain just going out there and slaughtering loads of people under some kind of pretense, because that's just how those original captains acted. They were a band of thugs. And yet, this particular mound of bodies has not been caused by Unohana, as Zaraki himself, or presumably just a nameless child at this point, crawls to the top of them like some feral animal, his eyes wide at the sight of people, someone else to take on in battle, seeming like he's constantly itching for a fight as he wields this enormously oversized Sanpakuto and a Sauchi that he has robbed from a corpse like the vulture he is, according to Oetsu Nimaya. And young Zaraki is a fascinating insight into a character as briefly as we get to see him, but he is this totally feral child in rags, crawling across bodies, clearly living the most darkest life possible, and because of that, it's really interesting to see and understand how Kenpachi might struggle with the seemingly cushy life of a captain as he kind of lives around nobility and people like that, and he must have always felt like an outsider, and when you see this flashback, it's not hard to sympathise with him as to why. But it's also interesting to see the disparity between them both at this point. Unohana is a fighter who has had a long history of fighting. She has defeated numerous powerful opponents, and she says herself that she has become weary, bored of fighting, weary of the blade and of the sword, and she's just not interested in fighting anymore because everyone is so weak. In comparison, the young boy Zaraki seems to be someone who still relishes the fight. He's animalistic, he leaps at her the moment he sees her, and he is ready for yet another battle. But both of them do feel like they were maybe fated to have this moment, to have this fight, that they were brought together as people who could actually enjoy the battle. But it's cool watching Kenpachi grow throughout the present day fight with Unohana. Really cool watching him observe the battle, look at the surroundings, manage to actually land a hit on Unohana at one point and be really kind of excited about that. And again, it's just cool to see. I think what's crucial here is it's really intriguing to see Zaraki approaching a fight from the underdog perspective, because normally he's so overbearing, so powerful, and it's really neat to see him just kind of on the receiving end for a bit, actually having to feel out his opponent and work out where he stands in a fight. It's a far cry from the man we had in the battle against Ichigo, where he just stood there and allowed himself to be cut on the chest. This is a totally different person, and I love that. It's also intriguing to me to see Kubo try and retroactively sort out Kenpachi's inconsistent power levels. And I actually really appreciate this. I think it's really cool. For a writer who is having to deal with his ever-expanding world on a weekly basis for years and years and years, to try and, this late in the game, establish some kind of stability, some kind of a through line with a character like Zaraki is very appreciated. And I think for the most part it does actually work perfectly fine. Essentially, as young Zaraki battled Unohana way back when they had their original fight, he realised for the first time ever that he was actually up against someone who could give him a worthy battle, who could give him a challenge. Despite this, he was still stronger than her, and it seems like out of a fear of accidentally killing her and ending the fight, he would lose her forever, lose that opportunity to have someone he could have a worthy fight with. And so during that battle, he unconsciously stifles his own strength. He pushes his power down to become weaker and weaker and weaker. Still, of course, immensely more powerful than most other people in the series, but not strong enough to defeat Unohana anymore, and she ends up winning their fight. But she is well aware at the start of that battle that she is actually weaker than Kenpachi Zaraki, and that he is locking down his own powers because of her, and that's what she considers to be her original sin, that she wasn't quite strong enough to match up to his expectations, I guess. And now, in the present day, she's trying to right that wrong by killing Kenpachi over and over again, resurrecting him each and every time, because she has worked out, and perhaps he has as well on some kind of a subconscious level, that every time he gets close to the threshold of death and comes back from it, he is almost reborn anew, and another part of that power is restored. A part of that lock he imposed upon himself, it fades away, and he becomes closer and closer to the power he originally had when he fought Unohana all those years ago. That's how Kubo kind of rationalizes that Kenpachi just lost to Ichigo, but then managed to defeat Neutra, despite the fact that Neutra was beating up Ichigo no problem. You know, although there are a number of other mitigating factors at play here, this is what Kubo gets at, that Kenpachi after every fight grows just a little bit stronger. After his fight with Ichigo, he grows stronger. Presumably after the Tosen fight, maybe as well, though he didn't really come close to death. But then he also doesn't come close to death in the fight with Yami, and yet a shot of that is shown as an example. So I'm kind of assuming it's every fight he's had in the series, apart from maybe Giriko, where Kenpachi gets stronger and stronger each and every time. And so now, Unohana is killing him over and over and over and over and over again, like so many times, to restore his power to its greatest point. This actually shows two different things. I think it shows just how unparalleled Unohana's power is, how immense her capability is, in that she is able to just kill Kenpachi Zaraki, seemingly one of the tankiest characters in the series. You know, you go back to that fight with Noitra and you see just how many ridiculous hits he takes, and now here he is being butchered over and over and over again, 10 times, 20 times, maybe even more than that, to get to the point he needs to be. And so, apart from maybe Yamamoto, it just shows you that Unohana was basically unstoppable. But on the flip side of that, it shows you just how much power Kenpachi actually had sealed away. It shows you just how, not weak he became, but just how much he lost, that Unohana had to kill him so many times to get him back to where he began. But as Kenpachi is resurrected once more, he suddenly seems to spring to life as Unohana realizes that he has almost reached that precipice once more, and he brings down his blade in an almighty strike, dealing a massive hit to her, seemingly killing her as he cleaves her down the middle. However, as the next chapter begins, Kenpachi seemingly has finished off Unohana, only for her foot to ram down into the ground. Her blade comes streaking up, slicing him across the face, and then, just as he realizes in time, she brings her sword down a second time and they clash once more. I've always really loved this sequence of events. I don't know why, it's just always been very satisfying to me. I love how clearly lightning fast Unohana must whip her sword back up the first time, because Kenpachi doesn't even seem to realize it until after he's already been struck, and he's only able to block the second attack. But I've always really thought that was so cool. And of course, it's here we learn this is why Unohana decided to master the healing art, so that she could heal her body over and over and over, and mean that that's how she continues to enjoy her fights. Kenpachi, as I mentioned earlier, this feeds into what I said about their differing ideologies. Kenpachi enjoys his fights by limiting himself. Unohana enjoys her fights by throwing her all into the battle, by getting scrappy, by getting injured, but deciding to heal herself rather than try and avoid injury, I guess. She's almost animal-like in that regard, but she dances with, such elegance as well. It's a really cool dichotomy for her character. But it's also cool as well for Kenpachi to have kind of thrown out his beliefs when he was fighting Noitra, for instance, because of course he had to use the kendo technique that he was taught by Yamamoto in order to win that fight. And I like that, because that kind of showed the kind of seriousness of Zaraki to actually want to win that fight in the end. And you can kind of imagine how the whole kendo lesson went with Yamamoto. Yamamoto was saying, your brutish way of fighting, you could be so much more if you just use two hands. It's as simple as that. And you can totally imagine Kenpachi being like, old codger, get out of here. I don't need that. This is how I fight. This is how I make my fights interesting. So it's cool to see Kenpachi kind of in that moment with Noitra being like, maybe I did learn something. And that shows a willingness to learn and listen for Kenpachi, which I think kind of helps his character grow as well. Unohana then activates her Bankai Minazuki, which we won't go into a lot of detail here, A, because there's just not much detail to go into, but we've also talked about it before numerous times, both in a video on her Bankai specifically and also her own character analysis. However, that awesome sense of movement continues here. These couple of pages are some of the best drawn in this entire fight. That wonderful shot of Unohana drawing out the blood for her blade, then sort of wielding it in front of her face, and then that wonderful page of Kenpachi just screaming in pure ecstasy, Unohana's twisted face as they realise they are entering the final stage of the battle, and they clash once more. Just a great sense of energy in this battle. And there is definitely an intimacy to this battle that you don't really ever see in Bleach. These two characters are dancing together. This is a dance more than a fight to the death. They are close. They are often smiling together, both enjoying the fight, enjoying the company, just loving this moment. And there is definitely that sense of shared intimacy here. I don't believe these characters were ever anything like lovers or anything like that throughout the time they've spent in the Gotei 13 together, but this is different to that. This is not fighting out of a desire to protect. This is not fighting for duty. This is fighting because you love to, because they've been dying for this reunion for over centuries now. And they finally are having this, and it looks like a dance to our eyes because they're both so talented at it. And that's why you get these close-up shots of them just in glee, just absolutely loving it, because this is something that maybe they both realise they will not get to experience again, and they've been lucky to even have this. In that sense, it sounds like love. It sounds almost like a forbidden love or something, you know, two characters having a dance knowing that maybe they'll never be able to do this ever again. And in that sense, their portrayal is fascinating to me. It's honestly really cool. On that note, I think to understand this fight truly, you must discard your previous notions of what it means to have a fight in Bleach. This, as I said, is not a fight to protect anyone. It's not a fight for pride, for duty, or anything like that. It is a fight just because you want to fight and you love to fight. And I think that's such a unique perspective. And that's why when it comes to Unohana's Bankai, I don't think what we are seeing here is necessarily a literal representation. I don't necessarily think they are literally being burnt away to skeletons. I think Kubo is just stripping both of these characters down to their barest instincts. You know, they are just, at the end of the day, two skeletons locked in eternal combat, exactly as they would both want it to be. And that's what we're seeing here, them ripped of everything material and left with just what their deepest desire is, and that is to fight and to fight and to battle. You know, that's all they want. And that's what I think we're seeing here. I don't think this is an effect of her Bankai, could be completely wrong, but that's kind of what I'm taking away from this moment. You know, Zaraki even says to himself that he's been sleepwalking through life, essentially, just waiting for this moment once again. Now that they are here, they are both relishing it to the highest degree. They both understand that this is exactly what true battle should feel like. And it's cool as well that once Unohana has activated her Bankai, she seems to be back on top in this fight, knocking Zaraki over, landing several hits, and the two of them are just continuing to clash as the fight goes on. And she seems as well to still be bringing Zaraki back from the brink. The fight, you know, her mission is not yet over. But as the fight winds down to a close, Unohana begins to reflect on what it means to be a Kenpachi. It means you are doomed to be the strongest, to wander your age as the strongest until you find somebody that you think could maybe take that position. And then either you'll kill them or they'll supplant you. That's what it means to be Kenpachi. And so for Unohana, she's never been able to rid herself of that title. She's never been able to pass it on to a worthy successor. Back in the original fight they had, she stood over his defeated body, his face on the ground, blood pooling around him where his new scar would form, and she knew that one day, not yet, but one day, this boy will bear the title of Kenpachi. He is the right person to have the official name of the Kenpachi. And we know, of course, many people, 9 other people have had the title of Kenpachi between these two. So that is kind of weird to me, which we've talked about before in our complete history of the Kenpachi video. But now Unohana can finally, officially pass it on to somebody that she thinks is worthwhile of carrying on her legacy. But in one final move, Zaraki stabs Unohana through her scar, through her throat and out of her neck, effectively ending the fight. Unohana drops her sword, a symbol of her relinquishing the title of Kenpachi, while Zaraki throws his sword behind him, a symbol of him forcibly ending this fight. And it's fascinating to see the way this battle ends, because the way Kenpachi tosses his blade aside is not something we've ever seen before. Someone who so dearly values battle, but it also shows you how much he dearly values Unohana. This is that same boy now who didn't want to kill her for fear of losing that ecstasy forevermore. And now he's worried he's done that. He's so worried even Zaraki Kenpachi will throw his sword aside. You know, he doesn't want to hold on to it anymore. But the damage is already done this time. That's the crucial difference. This time, Unohana has actually let herself die to an unshackled Zaraki. Unohana passes away peacefully, content that she has completed her role, that she has washed away her original sin and restored Zaraki supposedly to his greatest self. Zaraki is very unhappy with basically how this fight ends. He wants her to survive, but we discover the true purpose for this battle is so that Zaraki can finally hear the voice of his own Zanpakuto, which would begin his entire journey throughout the 1,000-Year Blood War. And so that is the battle between Zaraki and Unohana. There's so much to unpack, so much to dive in here, that it ran a little bit long. But that's not to say the fight is all good. It would be remiss of me to not address some of the criticisms that came out of this battle. Unohana is actually killed here, and she is never seen again, and that's obviously a real disappointment for people. Kubo did promise prior to this arc that we would see her in a fight and that she would wear her hair down, and both of those things happen here, but I don't think this is how anybody really envisioned it happening. People wanted to see a wild Unohana let loose against Sternritter, taking them down with amazing strokes of her blade and really showing us what she could do. For her to exist ostensibly just to power up Zaraki is a little disappointing, and that's effectively her character's entire role played out in about 3 chapters, and that is a bit of a shame. For my own count, I remember thinking that Unohana was going to survive, but that the persona of Yachiru was dead. I thought Retsu would be just her forevermore, that she had passed on the title of Kenpachi, and that was now his to hold forever. But no, she is actually dead, and she never returns. So that is a bit disappointing. And I remember a lot of people calling into question Kyoraku's kind of strategic mind, offing not only the Soul Society's greatest healer, but also quite obviously one of their greatest combatants in general, just to power up Zaraki. And this is all a little bit strange when you kind of put it into the greater context of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. Now, the Quincy in general are some of not the best enemies for Kenpachi Zaraki to face. A number of them have absolutely broken abilities that don't really conform to a traditional fight. So in that sense, it's great that Kenpachi got this. But so much is given to the fact that Zaraki now is so powerful. Now he is at the stage Soul Society needs him to be. And yet, unless I'm mistaken, he doesn't win a single fight after this. Gremmy accidentally kills himself. Kenpachi then gets annihilated by a surprise attack by the Bambis. He then tries to take on Pernida Pankajaz, but that's a brilliant example of a character just not being suited to taking somebody on. Kenpachi rushes in, as you would expect from him, only to be destroyed. And then in the fight with Gerard Valkyrie, it's an unwinnable battle. That's not Kenpachi's fault. Hitsugaya and Byakuya would never have been able to win that fight either. So it's difficult to see exactly where Unohana's sacrifice went. Obviously, for us as readers, we get the joy of finally being able to see Kenpachi's Shikai and Bankai, and perhaps that's worth it in and of itself, to get that arc for Kenpachi. This actually leads us nicely into the battle with Gremmy, which we'll talk about more next time on our next battle analysis, but safe to say the development I hoped for Zaraki doesn't necessarily stick around in the way I would have liked it to, and that's something we'll bring up next time. But that's it for this video, guys, on the battle between Zaraki and Unohana, the fight for the title of Kenpachi, essentially. What did you think about this battle? Let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed this fight between these two juggernauts. It's definitely one of my favourite battles, easily in the 1,000-Year Blood War, but maybe even spilling out to the rest of the series as well. I love the amount of introspection, I love the amount of deep dive thought Kubo does into both of these characters. And I think it just gives us such a wonderful, eye-opening experience for both Zaraki and Unohana. It completely transformed Unohana's character for the better, and made Zaraki that bit more interesting as well. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for sticking with it if you have right to the very end. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and let me know in the comments below what your favourite part of this battle was, and if you enjoyed it, and if you were happy with the outcome or not. Don't forget to subscribe, and until next time guys, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.